was very
You gotta say his name.
David Glenn Van Vactor, uh,
Born
born in
1906.
1906 in Plymouth, Indiana. Grew up in a small town nearby Plymouth, Argus, 35 miles from Chicago, and not too far from South Bend, which is a bit north of it. Um, it was on a river, the Tippecanoe, which my father fished throughout his life, even after he moved away to Evanston in the Chicago area, and was gainfully employed as a flutist in the Chicago Symphony Orchestra. He would come back and go fishing on the Tippecanoe and go tramping around the surrounding countryside near the house his father built for the family. Um, my father had some very good teachers, one of whom in teaching um, musical harmony was Carl Beecher, who was a pianist and later dean of the School of Music, who'd studied in in Berlin for about 15 years before coming back to America, to the little town in Illinois where he was born and raised. A very good teacher of harmony, to which my father called music theory. I don't know why they call it theory, but I mean it's very practical. And of course, the best way of teaching it is not, to my mind. I mean, I learned harmony with a program text. Best way of teaching it is it's done in France. It's called solfège. You go up the major scale, do, re, mi, fa, si, la, ti, do, up to from tonic, which is C, D, E, F, G, and then up to A, B sharp, which is a half step, and then you're again at C, which is the tonic, a return to the pitch that you began the whole scale with, and that's a major scale. Then you have the chromatic scale, which consists of 12 half steps, 12 notes, half steps, adding up to basically something like G sharp, which is like a half step from A, or A sharp, which is a half step from B, or B flat, which is a half step from G. These half steps end up being whole steps, whole intervals or pitches. Let's just call them pitches. My father taught harmony himself at Northwestern for a long time, and he also, when he came back, he got a job at Northwestern. He was teaching not only harmony, but he was conducting the little chamber orchestra and giving the young musicians, fledgling musicians, an opportunity to play in a chamber orchestra. He conducted all the major works of the repertoire. I mean, composers like Schubert, Bach, Beethoven, the Bach sons, Philipp Emanuel and Johann Christian Bach, the great Baroque composers like Telemann, Handel, and then up into classical period, Haydn, Beethoven, Mozart, and giving the students in his student chamber orchestra the opportunity to play all these well-known major works that constituted the repertoire. And of course, all of this he learned by memory himself, as a conductor when he was studying with Frederick Stock on the scholarship. And when Stock died, the orchestra stopped paying him his $4,500, and he went into the board of directors, and he was greeted by these angry men who disrespectfully said, "Dr. Stock is dead." I mean, he was not Frederick Stock had no PhD. He was not Dr. Stock, but he was dead, and it was a great tragedy in my father's life that he was no longer there to. You have the word protege. It means really protected. In French, the word is to protect them from, let's say, exploitation or evil. When my father said to the board, "But I am not dead," and they did pay him the money that he had been promised. I mean, he had it on paper, so I mean, they had a legal obligation to do so. But I mean, it was such a lousy, nasty, shitty thing to do to a young composer of his caliber and talent, and also the amount of works already that he completed were quite extraordinary, such as his Chaconne public that was written at 29 years old and performed by the Eastern Rochester Orchestra, and wonderful songs later published. No string quartet yet, some flute music. My father came back after studying in Vienna. He came back and studied briefly with Leo Sowerby, and I don't really know much about that. I think Leo Sowerby was so impressed with what he did, he said, "You really don't need me to tell you how to do this. You do it better than I could." He did help him with one of the pieces, the Sonatina for flute and piano, and which is in the Roger Rhodes catalog, and needs to be really printed, well printed, a new score done and parts. It was published. I think it's now no longer, the copyright has elapsed, so it could be published easily again or just duplicated with Xerox. I found a copy in Harvard in Payne Hall Library downstairs, and was tempted to just take it home. However, it just was, I don't believe in doing that to a piece of music that is protected by copyright. I think there was another 40 or so years before that would run out. I mean, the copyrights run longer for artistic works, I mean, up to 50 to 100 years, and it can be left to the family and still be protected by copyright. So Sowerby did help him. I don't know any of Sowerby's music. I do know that he was a homosexual man, and don't know much about his life or who played his music. There was another teacher there, and a composer named Arne Ohlberg, and his wrote a symphony. I think my father studied very briefly with him. He also studied with Mark Wessel, who was after him, sort of in love with him, and they went to the Bayreuth Festival together on bicycle, at which my father had the opportunity to catch Siegfried Wagner's son, Richard, and Cosima Wagner's son, Siegfried, came out on the balcony, and he was a flute player. They got in a long conversation for about an hour about playing the flute, which was wonderful for my father. And Eric Olberg, the son of Arnie Olberg, um, became a brain surgeon, studying with the great, one of the great, first great geniuses at Harvard Medical School. I forget his name, and maybe it was Cushing. I'm not sure, but I'm getting him confused with Cardinal Cushing. I don't remember the man's name, but I did myself witness uh, a a brain bypass at Harvard. Um, the Brigham, which had originally been an obstetrics hospital where I was a chaplain, an Episcopal chaplain in training for a period of time. When I first came back to Cambridge and was a special student under Christer Stendahl, later became Archbishop of Sweden, of all the books of the Mark, Matthew, Luke, and John, uh, of the four Gospels, a brilliant teacher and scholar, a wonderful man, with whom I actually had the chance of taking my wife to a Passover Seder, uh, which was right next to one of the Divinity School main classroom building. On one spring day, my mother was in town. Pat and I attended this really very nice Passover service and dinner uh, right across from the Center for World Religions, which is right up my alley because I've always been interested in reading Hindu texts and studying Taoism and Zen Buddhism and other esoteric like Chan, which was the predecessor in China that led to a Chinese uh, to a Korean Zen Buddhism. You see how near the word Chan is to Zen, the Japanese word, and Zen has always been very important to me. Now my son David, uh, as well as going on with his work at Harvard Medical School on neurobiology and tackling big problems like spinal muscular atrophy. And he promises after he's completed that work or taken it as far as it's going to go, he will then turn to Lou Gehrig's disease. I'm very proud of him, but he's now doing Zen archery. It was great pleasure and enlightenment. The other teachers, um, he had the opportunity because during the World's Fair the Chicago Orchestra played in the Shell in Grant Park, where we saw President Obama accept the defeat of his opponent McCain, and this great speech about yes we can, but he may have been able to do things, and but he so he could have. I think he could have done much more. That he he is he proved that he couldn't do what he said that he could do and could have done. It's a sorry performance. I'm very disappointed, and I think the use of the espionage law 9 times, seeing that the uh, uh, Attorney General Eric Holder putting people like Bradley Manning into prison for very long term for being a whistleblower. Um, Bradley Manning, now Chelsea Manning, after a transsexual operation, I guess, is really like what was done to Billy Budd, depicted in Herman Melville's shocking and just devastating story, heartbreaking story about Billy Budd. I mean, there's an opera that Benjamin Britten wrote about it, and so to Chicago during the World's Fair came many famous European composers, Rachmaninoff from Russia, Sergei Prokofiev, Bela Bartok, with whom my father spent about 6 hours, and he was in the orchestra when Isaac Sturr, at 14 years old, had his debut as a violinist, and I believe Rachmaninoff also played with the Chicago Symphony Orchestra. Prokofiev, when my father was finishing his first symphony, getting early in the morning from Evanston, all dressed up in his summer tux, and his or his tails, and basically his dress clothes, which he always conducted in, elegantly dressed and tall enough to look very, very good in them. Always having to have his dress shirts sent to laundry and ironed perfectly, starched, with a white bow tie and beautiful patent leather shoes he conducted in. My father was able to ask Sergei Prokofiev to look at his symphony, which he hadn't done the parts yet, and he had not yet won the New York Philharmonic Prize. Prokofiev spent 5 hours with him, going over page after page, turning all the pages through the end of the orchestral score. He found one place he suggested a change. My father thought it was a good idea, and it was changed. He did not do a lot of revision, but he was a great proofreader, very meticulous in every score. In all his parts, he went over everything with a fine-tooth comb and did sometimes find errors that corrected. He loved Prokofiev's music, conducted it a lot. He did not conduct the Fifth Symphony ever, in my knowledge. He did, I think, the Classical Symphony. Once he did the Shostakovich Fifth Symphony. And he and I attended a concert conducted by Sir George Schulte of the music for strings, percussion, and celesta. A favorite piece, had always been a favorite piece of mine. And then the third piano concerto, I forget who the pianist was. Schulte did a great job on both of those pieces. And we went back to see him in an intermission. And there he was in his room, off the stage, private room, and his wife, absolutely gorgeous woman, who was he met in London and courted, and later married. And she was lying on the stairs line. He introduced us, and my father talked about his having been in the orchestra. It's always my theory, because it seemed to me that there was a great leap forward for Prokofiev between the Fourth Symphony, which to me is not one of his best works. I prefer the Sixth Symphony and the Seventh Symphony to the Fourth Symphony, but between the Fourth Symphony and the Fifth Symphony, something happened. I always had this theory that it had something to do with what he saw in this young American composer's First Symphony, that he had learned something that helped to go a little bit, into the stratosphere of great, powerful realization of what he was all about as a composer. My father loved Prokofiev, and he always talks about how Prokofiev, a very good pianist, but hated to practice. But of course, my father, doing his 4 hours a day flute, which I heard every day of my life, and he did that quite late on, into almost to the age of 70. Taking the etudes of Marcel Maurice, and which are basically the essence of what he was practicing every day. Took one day off a month from that regime. So he's still playing pretty well late into his 70s. Retiring from conducting at the age of 72, and from teaching at the university, which meant that he didn't have to go to departmental meetings, which were a big bore. He didn't really get on that well with the man who'd taken his place as chairman, Alfred Schmid. He faced a great crisis when his orchestra started a revolt against him. It was really a kind of kill the father scenario. Very sick and ugly. And he got very paranoid and had homicidal fantasies, and it was really impossible to talk to, so I, on the phone about it, impossible to calm down. I decided I better go down and visit my parents over a weekend when I was first at Harvard Divinity School, which I did. And Davy stayed with Pat and her family because he loves Eric and Jessica. And she took very good care of it. So I got home, he was still quite agitated, and I later found that he was so distraught and despondent that he actually had written a suicide note. He was giving all of his scores to students, etc. Well, I had a great idea. There was a wonderful man named Bill Sanders, who was coadjutor bishop at St. John's Episcopal Church, where I was baptized and confirmed, whose minister was William Lee, but I don't think William Lee would have been quite up to this psychotic rage that went overtaking my father, which is then turning into a suicidal depression. Anyway, I called up Bill Sanders and got him Saturday morning. First time I got down there Friday night. And he said, well, have him come down, I'll be here at 10. So Daddy went down to St. John's, which is off of, trying to think what street it was. So near a gay street uptown, near the center, near the bus station and the main post office. It was on Clink Street, I believe. And Bill Sanders said to him, Dave, you've done so much for our town, for our city, Knoxville. What's to stop you from considering retirement? Haven't you done enough? And he was just finishing all the Beethoven symphonies, which he was doing from memory, of course. And so my father agreed with him, and obviously this was a kind of a pacifying or calming, uh, wonderful pastoral counseling that he was getting from a real, uh, the best that the Episcopal Church produces. And of course, I was trained also in pastoral counseling at the Divinity School in a program at Peter Brigham Hospital with the Episcopal chaplain and the psychiatric advisor to the medical school, Samuel Bojar, and chaplain William Leach, who was from Northern Ireland. A very interesting seminar. Peter Varick's daughter, Valerie Varick, was in it. Some other interesting people I got to know very well, made friends of. It was a very important experience, probably the most serious and crucial experience of my life, meant visiting patients in the hospital and counseling people who are undergoing open heart surgery and their families. And some people who were very, very sick. One woman, whose name was Mildred Tinch, I found in a great distress and having hallucinations after an operation, and followed her, and even when she went home, visited her, brought her tangerines and other nice things to eat. Her son was, she was from the islands. I don't know which island, but her son was a little bit hostile toward me, and I made a promise to myself that in the future that I want to follow a person that I was counseling and right to the end of their life. But I think her son barred me from visiting her on her deathbed. But Myrtle Tinch was her name. She's a lovely, wonderful woman. I made this promise with myself that I would make a rule that if I was going to see people, I'd tell their children, I have to be allowed to see her right to the end if I'm able to get there. So the upshot is, after the Ode to the Joy, the last movement of the Ninth Symphony had been sung and great applause and standing ovation. Our father announced that he was retiring. And it was the greatest thing, a relief to a very, very malignant situation vis-a-vis his orchestra, which I think just got tired of taking his direction and thought he was maybe too old to do a good job. I don't know what their opinions were, which were poisoning their minds against him, but they made him into a real bogeyman. Anyway, that was all over, and a whole stream of letters from Richard Trisol and Gilbert Trisol and other, John Watt, and some major composers that he had been responsible for educating and supporting and teaching composition and other things, counterpoint, conducting, whatever they needed. Streamed into the Knoxville Journal and the New Sentinel, and lauding his teaching, the role he had in bringing the orchestra up to a real point of excellence and success. They were very gratifying letters to the paper, the Knoxville papers, and he got many phone calls and so on. He began to relax, enjoy himself, and write music, a lot of music. He wrote 3 symphonies after that, the 5th, 6th, and 7th, and the great choral works, the episodes of Jesus Christ, about 40 minutes of music for large orchestra and double chorus and soloists. The Walden Symphonies, Symphonia Breva, and all this wonderful 36 pieces for woodwinds, which came out on double disc with Orion Records. Wonderful performances, double fugues, double quintets, 10 instruments, and trios, quartets, uh, the double quintet and double quintet, fabulous pieces of woodwind music. So what followed until he began to really age and see the difficulty of the aging process, and it was tremendous productivity until about 1980, when he broke his hip and had to have surgery and was laid up in a nursing home with a roommate who was moaning all night long and finally died, the poor man. And then finally my father could walk again with a cane, and he and my mother went out to California, out to Los Angeles to stay with Raymond for a while, and then took an apartment through her friend Lothar Munch, and got a nice Chrysler Fifth Avenue sedan, black sedan, and lived until my father died in 1994 on March 24th, and then my mother a week after Thanksgiving the next year. My sister died in 1994, pancreatic cancer finally, just a devastating, heartbreaking illness. With great courage all the way along the line. So I finished this video on a rather sad note, and my gratitude for the love of my sister and both parents, who had, in many ways, magnificent lives, who gave me everything that I needed to have a good life. And twice cancer survivor, I am going on, I hope, until I'm way into my 90s, late, and maybe even as long as 110. I'd be happy to get that far. It'd be a great triumph to survive that long. I hope I have another 34 years of good years to live, and I have much to do, many plans, such as I discussed earlier about a building in the trees, a beautiful modern structure, so we can look out over our view and maybe have guests more easily than we could with the 14 bedrooms that we have here, and many bathrooms, toilets, and showers, and bathtubs. I'd love to have a bidet here. So it'll either be the tree house or a couple of teepees in the lower garden, because I'm very much a lover of Native American culture and all the beautiful arts, the blankets that the American Indians made, and certain shamanistic practices such as the sweat lodges and the medicine man. So I must seek a good, restful night and leave my listeners, and I will be doing more in this vein. and all of this will be typed up eventually, and perhaps take a place in the magazine that I'm, or the art, fine arts magazine with reviews of books, art, and music. I think I'm going to call it. I was thinking of Pequod, but Sequoia has a greater significance because he's the man who transliterated the language of the Cherokees, Sali, to English, and wrote his grammar. My elementary school was called Sequoia School in Sequoia Hills, um, which is not far from Cherokee Boulevard. And Cherokee, of course, was the country club we belonged to, overlooking the Tennessee high up and on the mountains in the distance. One of the most beautiful views. Not as quite as beautiful as the one I look out on here in Lower Normandy, toward the plains of Caen, and not far from the seaside towns of after Deauville, down further from Deauville you get Villers-Houlgat, Villers-sur-Mer, and then finally you get to Ouistreham, where one takes a ferry to England or arrives having come from England. The most beautiful of those seaside towns, of course, is Honfleur, in my opinion. And then there's Trouville, which I love. Anyway, I think I've done a good one. I hope so. Oh, shit. Why would that just slip off like that?
Because you barely put it on the TV.
It's already leaning, about to fall. Be careful of that jagged glass. Good night.
You done with the video?
Mm-hmm. I think it's a good one. How long did it turn out?